Happy New Year! Now what? Well, here we are at the time where many of us start thinking about our resolutions, goals, and intentions for the year ahead. When discussing the new year and its implication, it seems most folks fall into one of two camps. First, there is the new year, new me contingent. These optimistic souls look at this tradition or transition as a time to reevaluate their place in the world and seemingly relish in the exercise of coming up with resolutions, list of goals, new projects, and a multitude of personal improvement endeavors. Then there are the folks that can't be bothered with the social obligation to improve anything. These folks are quick to point out the arbitrary nature of this particular date as a marker for wholesale change in one's life. They point out the folly in it all, often quoting statistics like in a recent study that showed that 41% of Americans who make New Year's resolutions by the end of the year, only 9% feel they are successful in keeping them. They often make a compelling argument for why bother. Me, I've fluctuated between both positions throughout the years, the bouncing back and forth between optimism and pragmatism, and this bouncing between these two positions and others. I've learned a few things and hope to share them with you today. Ultimately, I believe both these positions, the turning toward and the turning away, are different attempts at managing uncertainty. These positions, pro-resolution or anti-resolution, can be viewed as either a wishful prediction of the future or attempts at ignoring it entirely. Humans are funny this way. Here's my thesis. We don't do uncertainty well. We are always in the struggle of manufacturing control in a world when, if we listen to our inner knowing, understands that there is none to be found. In my role as a therapist, I've come to see my job not so much helping folks manage pathologies, but rather helping folks lean into and move through uncertainty. I no longer view myself as a therapist. I prefer the title of liminal space tour guide. When the New Year's resolutions ultimately don't come to fruition, I don't fault the many hopeful folks for their attempts at new intentions in the new year. I know how hard real change is. Not meeting the career goal, not starting the new business, the relapse, what gets characterized as self-sabotage are not personal failings, but rather a turning back to what is known and familiar in the face of liminal space or uncertainty. In a world that is losing many of its rites of passage, I think it's important to acknowledge markers of potential transformation and change, the new year being one. We live in an increasingly challenging world where the old is at battle with the new. We are being called to build a new world, a new way of being with each other, but we are losing the skills needed for the job. Here is where an understanding of the journey toward change and transformation found in rites of passage, for example, can steady us for the small and large sacrifices and patience that real change requires. We need world builders now, and moving through the structure of a rite of passage can teach us much about the skills needed for the challenges ahead. Narrative therapist Michael White wrote that there are 3 stages to rites of passage. First is the separation phase. Here a person breaks from the life as they know it. This marks the beginning of the journey. Second, there is the liminal phase. This is the betwixt and between phase in which one's familiar sense of being in the world is lost and where nothing means quite what it did before. This phase is invariably characterized by periods of disorientation and confusion and at times significant despair. Third, there is a reincorporation phase. Reincorporation is achieved when a person finds they've arrived in another place in life, where they experience a fit that provides for them a sense of once again being at home with themselves and with the way of life. So what is this liminal space I've been talking about? Franciscan monk Richard Rohr describes liminal space as the place where we, quote, where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our old world left behind, while we are not yet sure of the new existence. That's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay as long as you can by whatever means possible. This is the sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart and a bigger world is revealed. If we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idealizing normalcy, unquote. The word liminal comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. A liminal space is the time between what was and the next. There's also a popular meme floating around with two circles, not touching. One circle says comfort zone, and the other circle says where the magic happens. The space between these two circles is liminal space. It is a space of transition, waiting, and uncertainty. It is the space where all transformation takes place. Part of my job is to train new therapists. When I begin training with a new cohort of therapists, I often ask them, how many of you are here because you are the person all your friends or family come to for advice or counsel? Inevitably, most if not all raise their hands. I then ask them, how many times has someone come to you for advice and you said, just do this? They all nod, and then I ask them, how many times do these advice seekers actually just do that? Most, if not all, shake their heads, acknowledging that none of the advice seekers actually follow the advice. The reason advice doesn't work and why I've retired from advice giving is a lack of understanding of liminal space, the space between what is known and familiar and what might be possible. There's no skipping or avoiding this transitional space if you are indeed going to experience real transformation and change in your life. And maybe more importantly, there's no escaping this uncomfortable and destabilizing space if we are going to bring about real change in our communities, societies, and world. As stated earlier, journeys into liminal space most often start with some sort of separation, either voluntarily or more commonly imposed. Imposed entries into liminal space commonly happen when experiencing job loss, divorce, or breakups or deaths. Voluntary separation often begins with an unsatisfactoriness with one's position in life. Often people who seek my help will come in describing the problem as being stuck, when really they are standing on the precipice of separation, contemplating a journey into the unknown, unable to take the first step without some help. Regardless of it being voluntary or imposed, separation and entry into liminal space will often start with the experience of failure. We live in a culture now that doesn't understand the fruits of failure. If we are to make any significant changes in our lives, communities, or world, we need to make friends with failure. No deep change can happen without the experience of failure. If the fear of failure is keeping you from doing the hard thing you want to do or know you need to do, I get it. Risking failure requires us to take some uncomfortable countercultural positions. Risking failure will require us to abandon aspirations of perfection in ours and others' eyes. Risking failure will require us to trust in our abilities, wisdom, and sense of worth, rather than outsource these things to others. And risking failure will require us to be okay with failing. We need a new understanding of failure. Failure should be regarded as a signpost of doing, effort, and courage. In his book, The Queer Art of Failure, Jack Halberstam writes, quote, under certain circumstances, failing, losing, forgetting, unmaking, undoing, unbecoming, not knowing may in fact offer more creative, more cooperative, and more surprising ways of being in the world, unquote. I couldn't agree more. So what is it you need to separate from in the coming months or year? Is it a job or a relationship? Is it old ways of being or old identities? What sort of separation do you see on the horizon that may be imposed on you? How do you want to meet these impending changes? With a death grip on the way it used to be? Or with a free fall into the liminal? Now about reincorporation. Most of the best stories have a common narrative archetype or template. They typically start with the hero or protagonist going on an adventure that inevitably features some sort of challenge, dark night of the soul, or lesson to be learned that is overcome, always ending with the protagonist returning home transformed and changed. As a practitioner of Zen Buddhism, one of my favorite examples of this story arc is what is known as the 10 ox herding pictures. These 10 images depict a young ox herder, who could be any of us, in a quest to tame, train, and transform his heart-mind, which is represented by the ox. After some challenges and different stages of progress, the oxherder eventually meets the task at hand, with the last picture showing him transformed into what looks like a Buddha entering the marketplace with helping hands. Here they are, now deeply connected to the world, holding a bag of new wisdom, understanding, and compassion to put to work in the world. As uncomfortable and as wanted as they may be, there is a point to these journeys into liminal space for us and for those around us. These experiences tool us for the job of bringing about a better world, even if that world is just behind our front door. Brene Brown interviewed Richard Rohr recently on her podcast and shared this quote from their conversation. Rohr said, quote, "One of the great surprises is that humans come to full consciousness precisely by shadowboxing, facing their own contradictions, and making friends with their own mistakes and failings. People who have had no inner struggles are invariably both superficial and uninteresting. We tend to endure them more than communicate with them, because they have so little to communicate," unquote. Excuse me. This is my great fear and motivator, the fear that I will live a life that is uninteresting and superficial, or that I will be uninteresting and superficial. If I were to look back at every interesting, profound, and transformational experience I've had in my life, they all happened as a direct result of my willingness to let go of the known and familiar and to step into the void of uncertainty. I have also discovered that these experiences of rite of passage have also made me useful to others that are contemplating journeys into liminal space. I'm often approached by people that know me or have been referred to me because of some knowledge of my life experience, which consists of starting businesses, making midlife career changes, and of just trying to live an interesting life. When these people reach out to speak with me or seek advice, I try to warn them in advance that I have one move. One move, that's it. And that one move is that no matter what you are contemplating doing, if it's your heart's desire, you jump. That's the one move. You jump into liminal space. That's all I got. But don't worry. As Trungpa Rinpoche said, the bad news is you're falling through the air. Nothing to hang on to, no parachute. The good news is there's no ground. I'm a big fan of paradox. Laura Lundgren has written that paradox is a spiritual discipline because it helps us resist the temptation of seeking quick certainty and complexity. Whenever paradox is present, something important is happening and should be paid attention to. An example would be the more we seek certainty or gratification, the less we find. Or more importantly, the more we let go of certainty and satisfaction, the more likely we are to be visited by the things our hearts desire. Liminality is full of paradox. So as you find yourself contemplating the year ahead, acknowledging this marker, the new year, as a rite of passage, think about the journey ahead. Make resolutions or not. Fall back to the comfort strategies of year past or not. If my Buddhist practice has taught me anything, it has certainly taught me that the only sure thing in life is change. So we might as well embrace it and learn how to surf it. In that effort, let me leave you with some questions to consider. How might you invite more uncertainty and curiosity into your life? How will you make the most of the real potential available in liminal space? Who will support you and who will you support in the often terrifying experience of uncertainty? And what will you do with the skills you acquire on these journeys? My best to you in the new year. May the old world fall apart and a bigger world be revealed. Peace.